Welcome to another video on dealing with partnership issues. Today I want to talk about sunk costs and when tension arises in a partnership over the need to put more money in. When a business gets in trouble and there's a disparity of the amount of money that partners are able to put into a business. Let's get started. The first thing I want to say right off the bat is I want you to be wary of sunk costs sinking you. People tend to just let sunk costs carry them into a business. Now let's talk about this a little bit. What are sunk costs? Now, sunk costs are expenses that were necessary to keep the business going. So you had to put money in to pay the power bill, or you had to put money in because the business ran out of cash and it couldn't meet payroll or it couldn't make the rent, so somebody had to pony up. Typically it's a cash call. So you've made an investment in the business, that money is there, and now you've had a call for cash where you've had to put more into the business to keep it going. An example is like the power bill is a sunk cost. The money was spent, it was necessary to keep the doors open, and it doesn't add revenue to today or value tomorrow. Now, people will argue with that and say, well, it adds revenue today. If we didn't pay the power bill, we'd be closed. We wouldn't be making money. True. But paying the power bill doesn't make money. It's not like advertising where you spend some money on advertising, it generates new revenue, and that gives you some hope for the future. Paying last month's power bill does not increase your revenue. Yes, it will keep the doors open, but it doesn't add revenue and it doesn't add value. You can't say, well, we've paid 12 power bills at $200, so the business is worth $2,400 more now. It doesn't work like that. Those costs are called sunk costs because they are sunk into the business and they are not recoverable. Now, as sunk costs mount, we tend to cling to the hope of recovering those sunk costs and those long spent expenses, and we ignore the reasons that those sunk costs exceeded returns. In other words, if you have to put money into a business month after month to pay the power bill or cover the rent, we tend to ignore why we have to put money in. We always think it will be better tomorrow. Maybe it will, probably it won't. Now, the danger with sunk costs, it triggers some very bad behaviors. Now, one of the problems in a partnership with sunk costs is the one with the most sunk burden tends to be the one least risk averse. Now, let's break this down. The one that's put the most money in is the one with the least risk aversion. Now, you might say, well, that's logical, but that also carries into the future. So the one that's put the money is the one that wants to keep going, and the one that hasn't put the money is the one that's least likely to start putting in money. All right, so if there are, say, 3 partners in a business, and one of them is the constant source of adding money when necessary, putting the money in, that is the one that's going to want to continue the business when it gets in a lot of trouble. Why? Because that one wants to get their sunk costs back. The other 2, they don't want to start putting in money. They've seen things get worse and worse. They've seen you put in money and lose it, and they don't want to add. So the one who has put the most in is the one most likely to want to continue. It ought to be the other way around. The one who has the most to lose ought to be the one least likely to want to continue, but it doesn't usually work out that way. The one that puts the least amount of money is generally the one that wants to quit first. Now, let's stop and think about this. If a business is failing and you have infused more money than your partners, stop. It's time to say no, because the risk is all falling on you, and as the risk accumulates on you, as the sunk costs grow and your money goes into this business, it gets harder and harder to get it back, and it becomes less and less likely that you will. You have to be realistic. Don't let sunk costs pull you under. Now, it gets to be a bit like gambling. You go to the tables in Las Vegas and drop $1,000. Boy, you've had a run of bad luck. You're right on the verge of your luck changing. Might as well get out that ATM card. What's another $500, right? You've gone this far. And this is where people go very deep in losses. So I'm cautioning you to avoid letting sunk costs pull you in. Don't look backwards, look forward. Don't let, well, I've already spent this much, what's a little more? That's very bad reasoning. Look forward and say, if I spend some, what does that get? Period. The sunk costs are sunk. Consider this. What did those sunk costs go toward? If you're paying expenses, if it's paying the rent, payroll, the power bill, if you're adding money to keep a business open, man, you better look very, very, very closely at that, because the chances of the business failing are very great. Now, if you sunk $100,000 into a business to buy a new machine to manufacture widgets, that's an asset, and maybe we should look at that a little differently. That's not really a sunk cost. That could be viewed as an investment. So if your money went to a material object, something that could be considered an asset, then I think we should look a little more closely at the possibility of going forward. But if you're paying expenses, not good. The next thing you want to look at is, how long has this been going on? If you're in the third year, the business is still not profitable, and you're still having to do cash calls for things like power bills, payroll, rents, insurance to keep the doors open, then there's a problem. Now, if it's 1 month, all businesses can have a downturn. The economy can get a little shaky. The restaurant business cannot do well for a couple of months because of people don't have disposable income, or maybe bad weather. But if the business has been borrowing money just to operate for a long time, for month after month after month, then that's something to look at pretty seriously, because that's probably not going to turn around. The other thing you want to look at is, what is going to turn the business around if you put more money in. So if you've already sunk more money than anybody else in the business, and now it's you got to pony up more money because nobody else is going to, and you're the only one that can do it, and the full burden of keeping this business going becomes up to you, you have to look at what is going to change things if you put more money in. Now, paying the power bill doesn't turn a business around. Covering the rent doesn't turn it around. All right, so if you put in enough money to cover 2 months of expenses, you have to be really honest with yourself and painfully realistic and say, why is the business going to turn around if I pay the rent this month? That isn't going to do it. Meeting expenses is not going to turn a business around. It'll keep the doors open another 2 months, and it will continue to burn cash, but it won't turn a business around. So what do? First of all, know when to quit. Draw a line. Now, primarily, I'm speaking to people in partnerships. If you're a sole proprietor, it's another issue. But when you're in a partnership and you're the only one putting in money, there comes a time when you have to draw a line. You have to say to your partners, I'm not going to put any more money. I'm in deeper than you. Either you need to catch up with me now and put your money in and keep this business going, or if I'm going to put in $10,000, then you all are going to need to put in $10,000 each as well. You need to draw a line, and if they won't join you at that line, you must quit. You have to learn where to draw the line, because once you get out there with those sunk costs and you start plowing in the money and your partners aren't, they're going to let you go. Just run with it. Keep putting in the money. All right? And it's pretty hard to start negotiating a greater and greater percentage of ownership. And with that higher percentage of ownership becomes, you also acquire a higher percentage of risk and a higher percent of the debt, unless your debt is equal in several, which it may not be if you start defining it as 80% of the business becomes yours and they become 20%. They become almost minor partners. They become almost limited partners. So you better be careful there when you start plowing that money in. I recommend that you draw a line and know when to quit. You must set that limit and say, I'm not going to add any more money if you become the sole banker in a business, if every time the business needs money, it becomes up to you, it's probably time to quit. And I think you should look at that seriously. And I don't want to talk about all the exceptional reasons why that might not be the case, because 95% of the time, if one partner is the sole banker, it's time to quit. Now, if the business is going to continue, have your partners at least meet your spend and match you in the current needs. So if you're $300,000 deeper than your partners, they need to start catching up with that. If your partners are not willing to put money in, might not be a good idea to continue the business. But if the decision is made to continue the business, your partners need to get money from somewhere and start supporting you so that you're not the banker. If you are the banker, it's probably time to quit. You must demand that your partners step up and start feeding this business if it's going to continue. The other thing is, if the business is going to continue and you're all going to put more money in, you should have a turnaround plan. And the turnaround plan should include budgets, pro formas, and concrete plans to go forward. Now, when I talk about this with clients, they say, well, if we keep it open another month, we're going to manage it better and it's going to do better next month. There's no solid plan to do it. There's no, we're going to spend $5,000 on advertising. That advertising will produce $8,000 in revenue. That $8,000 in revenue will produce $4,000 in gross profit. That $4,000 in gross profit will go toward the back rent that we owe, and that will cover that. Then our expenses will go down because the back rent will be covered. There's none of that. So you must have a solid plan, and that plan has to be documented with budgets, pro formas, and concrete plans. Now, by concrete plans, I mean what steps? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What steps are you going to take next month, then the following month? What steps will you take for the next 180 days to make things different? Period. No just discussion that it will be better. Now, I want to summarize this and wrap it up. Cut your losses. If you're the only one feeding money into the business, it might be time to quit. Be realistic and honest with yourself about that. If necessary, get an impartial review. Have somebody look at the books, walk through the business, sit down with the partners and say, look, this is what I see. I see a lot of businesses where it may be time to quit. It may be leaning that way. Like 70% of me says quit, 30% of me says keep going. But if the partners want to keep going, at least I can say, look, this is what I see as your odds. If you're willing to pull together and really make the effort, I think you can make it. But you should get an impartial review. Don't just delude yourself and say, if I can keep the business open another month, we're going to do great. Without a plan. You have to have the plan to do it. Get an impartial review. Get some outside eyes to look at the business. Be consciously aware that sunk costs are pulling at you in an irrational direction. I have this conversation with my clients all the time. I say, look, you keep telling me I've got so much money tied up in this business, I can't quit now. The sunk costs are pulling at you irrationally. You have to learn to let go of that because you're throwing, the old expression of throwing good money after bad. There is a time to stop. Be very wary if your partners lack the same level of real material commitment that you have. If they won't match you, that should concern you. All right, that's enough on this topic. If you need help, you need advice, give me a call. I'd be happy to help you think this through. It's my number. There's my email. Thank you for watching.